Hello, viewers. We are back again with an exciting episode with one of our friends and actually an expert or and in sorts of Judaism and as well as Hinduism. And we Indians have very soft corner, especially American Hindus have soft corner for Judaism, people who follow Judaism, as well as people who are they call it Zionism, is both ways. Because for us, for American Hindus, both are the same thing. And the friendship that we have with Jews and also Jews in politics is phenomenal. I mean, India depends on Israel and in many ways, in Israel too. And one of the foremost tourism destinations in Tel Aviv nowadays, people don't know that the vegan capital of the world is Tel Aviv, and it has the maximum number of vegans. And if you go to Rishikesh and Goa and any of the cities in India, Varanasi, and these three cities are the very popular cities for many people from Israel visiting India. And even in the US, in fact, even my own guru is a Jew, Radhanath Swami. And so we have that bond, and we want to strengthen it. But I'm going to ask some very tough questions to David, and let us all hear and discuss it. And we want to educate American Hindus that how they can make their faith stronger. And sometimes for them, they have to counteract these elements so that the wrong parts or the political parts of the culture are eliminated. So, without any delay, welcome, David.
Thank you.
And it's wonderful to have you on a Saturday afternoon. And the last video that you did went very viral in across all social media platforms. So, David,
Yeah, I saw that.
yeah. So, David, my question to you is like, what I see is that there is a deliberate attempt by the leftist academicians to tarnish Hinduism in a bad light. Do you also see that?
I don't think they perceive themselves to be intentionally tarnishing it. The thing is, it's like the blind men and the elephant. And Hinduism is the elephant, and the academics who think they are experts on Hinduism are the blind people. And they are looking at a thing here and a thing there, and they're missing the essence. And part of that has to do with the confusion around the idea of religion. And that idea really was created by Christians fairly recently, like maybe 1700. And so when they went to India, they saw religions, and they thought of these religions as being like Christianity, a unified collection of beliefs. Well, it's not like that in India. In India, it's like people have ideas. They have lots of ideas, but they don't have any organization to that collection of ideas. It's just ideas which developed in India are called Hinduism or Jainism or Buddhism or something like that, but they aren't organized together in any way, and there aren't any belief systems. So they go there, and they also try to understand the Hindu epics in terms of what the Greeks were doing, and while what the Greeks were doing was similar to what the Hindus were doing, India is vastly more diverse in terms of its religious thinking than Greece was. It's been more diverse. It's been more highly developed than Greece was. Philosophy played a much more central role in India than it did in Greece. So you have people like Plato and Aristotle, but they weren't as central to what the Christians viewed as Greek religion as the Upanishads and some other philosophers have been to what Hindus perceive as their religion. And I would guess that you've got Hindus born in the United States. I would guess you've got Hindus who don't fully understand this, because I've been studying Hinduism since the 1950s, and I've just come to understand some of this stuff in the last few years as I've encountered more Hindus and thought more about it. So I think it's more useful to look at people as people who are trying hard but are ignorant, rather than looking at them as malicious and evil.
No, absolutely right. I think you brought a very good point that that not everyone is evil or malicious point of view, and I think American Hindus. Now, I'll focus on this community as only that we have failed to educate properly all these academicians or raise a voice in a proper forum. And I think one of the popular, I would say, writers on the Hindu side is Dr. Rajiv Malhotra, and I think he has done a phenomenal job in highlighting and educating some of those. And he also faced an institutional challenge, actually. He mentions that in many interviews that he had faced an institutional bias against Hinduism to be even proper studied.
Mm-hmm.
I just give
Mm-hmm.
you an example that the Harvard Hindu Studies Department is led by Francis Clooney. And I take his example particularly because it is mentioned on his profile that he is a Christian pastor. And he has translated Ramanuja's work. And I'm sure he must have, since he is not part of the tradition, he must have definitely inculcated some areas with his Christian upbringing, and it may look very conflicting to the followers of tradition of that particular Ramanuja sect, which is Sri Sampradaya. So, and that is a question, big question to be raised over there. So, my next question to you is that how do you see that what we should be doing as a American Hindu community to reach out to these professors and educate them about the core principles of Sanatan Dharma culture, which is colloquially called Hinduism?
Well, there are a lot of ways like American professors would have been in the 19th century if they'd approached American Indians and their religions, and they would have patronized them and looked down at them and viewed their religions as inferior. Now, the interesting thing is that today you wouldn't hear of academic people treating American Indians and their religion the way they treat Indians in India and their religions. It wouldn't be done. And so, for some reason, Hindus are treated as if they're there are a lot of Hindus, but there aren't as many as there are Christians and Muslims. And for some reason, they treat, because Hindus are the majority in India, they don't treat Hindus the way they treat American Indians or Indians in other parts of the world. They don't say, gee, these are the people who are talking about their native traditions, and who are we imposing on them? We should be listening to them and learn. But they do that. I mean, they just won't do that. So that, for instance, you come to them and you try to explain things to them, and they won't listen. I mean, I've read a lot of things by, professors, and if you don't have a PhD where you have spent years studying under these people and learning to tell them what they want to hear, they don't want to listen to you. They say, well, you're uninformed, you don't understand. But the truth is, they're the ones who are uninformed. They're the ones who don't understand. But they don't get it.
So one of the very critical authors is Audrey Truschke, and also there is another one called Peter. I forgot his last name, Peter something. And these authors have it, and Wendy Doniger is obviously one of them, third one. Now,
well, Wendy Doniger is really the founder of all this way of thinking. I mean, she's the one who invented it, and she's at the University of Chicago, and Audrey Truschke is at Rutgers. But, I mean, Wendy's a Jewish atheist, And so she treats Hinduism the way she would probably treat Judaism if she had made herself an expert on Judaism, as just a bunch of fictions.
Correct.
And that's what they all do. They all assume superiority to people who follow the Indian religious traditions. They all just take it for granted that they're intellectually superior, that they have greater knowledge. And part of it is that they are tuned into this complicated American university system where if you have a PhD, you're viewed as an expert on all kinds of things, not just whatever your PhD is in. So that instead of thinking, well, I'm an expert in Sanskrit, or I'm an expert in what American universities teach about Hinduism, they think they're actually experts on Hinduism.
Correct.
Which is ridiculous because they don't spend time in India actually trying to understand the lived experience of all the different people who are Hindu. You know, I was just reading the other day, I had read this years ago, but I was just reading it on a website. Sam Clemens, Mark Twain, went and spent 3 months in India, and he just loved India. And he thought it was amazing, and he said it was like the great ancestor of the world, and he loved Hinduism. He met a Hindu holy man. He thought he was wonderful. But that way of looking at India that Twain took, he spent 3 months in India, is the total opposite of the way all these learned professors look at it. Have you ever read, there's a poem by Walt Whitman, when I hear the learned astronomer talking about astronomy, after a while I get, I'm paraphrasing it. After a while I get impatient and I go out and look at the silent wonder of the stars, because you lose sight of that wonder of the stars when you're just talking about it in terms of numbers and superficial things. And that's what they're doing, but they don't understand that they're doing that. And it's like a club. I mean, they're all in a club. They've all been trained the same way. They all think the same way.
Absolutely. It's like I call it a collection of people, and it's like it's a vicious cycle. So first of all, they have become prisoners of their own institution, number one. And I call them prisoners of institution because there is it's a vicious cycle. So if an Indian university wants to work with Harvard, they have to follow Harvard's policies and Harvard's literature. There is no coming back. There is no discussion. There is no counter questioning. Like if I'm an author on Gita. I've written two. One is a Hindu Bible and Gita, and I'm pretty sure about my scholarship on that one. There is no opportunity for me to challenge his views on anything, including Vedanta, because I'm not a graduate from Harvard, and I'm not a professor at Harvard. I'm not in any teaching position. It's even impossible for me to counter them. And so they are the judge, the jurors, the victims, and everything else. It's practically, it's like a dogma. They're teaching in the name of Hinduism. They're teaching dogmas and trying to fit Vedic culture or Hinduism into their Christian philosophy. And anyone who knows Hinduism is maybe a new word, but it's called Sanatan Dharma, and the basis is Vedic literatures. And if anyone sees the volume of Vedic literatures and the sophistication of Vedic literatures, and then people will have naturally come to a conclusion, then how can a person who actually is not part of the tradition, how can they make such a big judgmental calls on something which they fairly are able to even touch, like creating controversies like Dalit, which is a political thing. It has nothing to do with the scriptures.
Right.
In Dalit is a very recent term, and it means somebody who is economically disadvantaged. It is not a community, and like a lot of these kind of propaganda is there. So, David, what is the thing which, especially when we talk about these Western universities who are, and you explained it very well last question. what do you think, in your opinion, is the step forward? Like, how do we engage them going forward?
Well, are you familiar with Plato's Republic? And he has this story of the people in the cave who are chained and they can only look a certain way and they can't get out of their chains. And so people walk by their cave and they see shadows of the people walking by. Well, in effect, these experts in the universities have created that kind of environment for themselves. They're locked in their cave and they think they're seeing the world, but they're really just seeing shadows of the world. They're not seeing the essential nature of what they're talking about. And partly because if you're brought up in a Christian tradition, even if you're not Christian, but if you're brought up in America or England, where Christianity so dominates, you think of everything that you call religion in terms of Christianity, and you start trying to relate what you experience to the ideas you have of Christianity, and you don't understand it as it actually is. And that's a problem that goes beyond just Hinduism. A lot of people don't understand the nature of things as they actually are. They're seeing them through a prism that is distorting what's actually there. And
Correct.
so, but how you get these people to wake up, that's the interesting thing. How do you get these people to wake up and see that what they are calling Hinduism isn't a religion like Christianity and is something that they just don't understand? And that's hard because these people have invested enormous amounts of time and effort and money in getting to their distinctions, and if they throw it away, they're throwing away their whole life.
Now, I think there is one problem of Hindus also, because I feel that many Hindus are not able to explain simple things in a very simple language. Like when I ask a Hindu the caste system, now it's a done. The discussion is over because
Mm-hmm.
instead of saying that caste is a Portuguese word and Bhagavad Gita there is no word caste. The only thing mentioned in Bhagavad Gita is varna, which is a category, which means that when human beings are born in this world, they automatically come with guna and karma from their past birth, and it has nothing to do with where they are born. And based on the activities and their education qualification and their propensities, they are automatically assigned a varna. So it has nothing to do with birth. And but when you ask an ordinary Hindu, they are not able to communicate that very effectively. And another thing is that the principal scripture of Hindus is Bhagavad Gita. It is one book which is a summary of our entire Vedas. It has all information from all of the Vedas in a small summary form, and that also many Hindus are not able to answer. When you ask them, so I don't blame them completely. The Western universities also, but I also acknowledge that it is a fault of Hindu community also, that they are not able to communicate in a way that Americans can understand. American society is far more simpler than Indian society, because Indian society has thousands of years of Vedic culture. It's very easy for Indians to understand their culture, but the few simple concepts that I'm a spirit soul, I'm not the body, which is the root of the entire Vedic philosophy, that they are not able to communicate. And while the Western universities, they work on the bodily concept and as a community concept, that Christian, either you are a Christianity community or a is Muslim community or a Jewish community, because then you're the people of the book. So right there the difference comes in. There's a people of the book versus free thinkers who are allowed to think openly about themselves and others also. I think that's one communication area that American Hindus have to definitely focus on. Uh, from your point of view, you have done so much research. What is your inspiration that comes from where you have been? I see you as very knowledgeable in Hinduism topics based on your social media messages and other things. Where is your inspiration comes from in defending Hindus, even though you are not part of the Hindu faith, but you are a practicing Jew and you defend Hindus very well, better than most Hindus.
Well, you have to understand my situation. My parents, who were viewed themselves as Jewish, well, my father was Jewish and my mother viewed herself as somebody who had joined the Jewish tribe. They raised my brother and I to, well, first they raised us with no religion. And we got to public school, and that was a big problem when it turned out we didn't know what prayer was, we didn't know what God was, we didn't know anything about religion. So my parents wanted us to fit in. They didn't want to stand out. My father had a really was working on super secret stuff at Grumman Aircraft, and so they immediately started taking us to a church that my mother, the nominal Christian, wouldn't set foot in. And the people at that church told us that our parents were damned and we were probably damned. And they still insisted on sending us to that church. And I actually moved us to a different church that didn't do that, where the minister was actually his parents were Jewish and they had converted to Christianity. But the point is that I don't know if you've heard of the school prayer decision that banned school prayer in the American schools.
Yes.
Well, that was my school district. Starting in 8th grade, we had this prayer that was written by the Board of Regents that we had to say, and we had to pray for our parents and our teachers. In other words, our parents and teachers were asking us to pray for them. And it was there the whole time from 8th grade till I graduated. And then June after I graduated, the Supreme Court banned it. And the people who fought against it were Jewish, although the Jewish community didn't really want to accept them because they were pariahs for fighting against it, and everybody thought they'd lose, but eventually they went to the Supreme Court and they won. But the point is, because I was brought up in that environment, I was really perplexed when it comes to dealing with Catholicism and Judaism and Protestantism. And I got a book, The Wisdom of China and India, and I read the Bhagavad Gita, the Yoga Aphorisms of Patanjali, the Book of the Tao. I've read some of the Dhammapada. I read one of the Buddhist sutras, and that just opened a whole new world to me, especially the Gita with its idea that, do what you do in the world, but do it out of devotion to me. Anyway, it was tremendously inspirational. And of course, I've read the Gita many times since then, but that opened a whole new world to me. So Hinduism has always been very important to me. And then I got involved in interfaith things, and I got involved with Hindu American Foundation. And I went to a conference on the Gita, and what I realized is that in a lot of ways, even though Judaism is an Abrahamic religion, it isn't like the other two Abrahamic religions. And that's, people in those religions have the same kind of confusions about Judaism that they have about Hinduism. It's an ancient religion that comes before people had the idea that there were separate religions. And nowadays, with the idea there are separate religions, people will say, oh, guy may be so-and-so, and he may be really good, and he may be, but I can't listen to him because I'm Christian and he's a Buddhist or he's a Hindu or he's whatever. Whereas if you go back to when Judaism was formed and back to the early days of Hinduism, you had rishis, you had sages, you had holy people, and they were holy people. And they might not be following exactly the same practices. Some of them might even call God by a different name or even have different systems, but they were holy people and they were doing good. And the same for practices. I mean, if a practice was good, it didn't matter where it came from. If an idea was good, It didn't matter where it came from. It's only after Christians started segregating things into these different religions that people started saying, "Oh, well, I can't listen to that. That's not my religion." So, and I've never had that particular problem. I've wanted to understand the human mind, and the greatest repository of knowledge about how to manage our minds is in religious texts, and
Correct.
especially
Um,
Hindu and Buddhist religious texts. There's just an enormous wealth of understanding in how to manage your mind. And
Absolutely.
I had people thinking that I was crazy, so I was especially concerned to understand how to manage my mind. A, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't crazy, and B, because I wanted to know how to deal with all of these people who had weird ideas, who thought my ideas were weird.
No, it's a very popular saying. A crazy man thinks that everyone else is a crazy, and a sane man thinks everyone else is sane. So,
Yeah,
so people, when they point one fingers at somebody, fingers point at themselves, and one to the God. You know, when you say that, so it's
yeah,
three fingers to you, one to God, and one to the other guy. So, one interesting thing that you said, and I might store it for our next session we have. In my experience, I am a follower of Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. I am a practitioner for last 27 years. And in my following, and I have seen Jews, I have seen Muslims, I have seen all kinds of communities accepting Vedic culture in a big way through ISKCON. And I've seen that in my with my own life that people, when they come to a spiritual tradition like Gaudiya Vaishnavism or Brahmadva, and like they feel a lot of relief. First of all, as soon as they come in, they say there is a sense of relief that just a mere concept that you are a spirit soul, you are not the body. Now that just that one line, it relieves people of a lot of anxiety and a lot of pressures and all that kind of things. And then the spiritual life starts developing. And when I see these coming back to the professors and all these people, now when I talk to when you see their writings and everything, their their writings are purely based on the bodily platform, and like almost looks like politics, that they are trying to judge something, someone down, pull someone down, so that they can prove their point. And they really miss the spiritual part of the Hindu culture, and that's where the whole whatever they write doesn't make sense. And I'm sure that you have also experienced that, since you yourself been a student of this kind of
yeah.
philosophy.
You know, they may be better now, but they didn't understand. The black people would say they didn't understand soul. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, that white academics didn't understand soul. It was an alien concept to them. I remember I had a high school teacher, and somebody wrote in a paper that the person's soul awakened, and the teacher just drew down on her because she couldn't really define what soul was. And you can't weigh it. You the unconscious mind or the mind. So
Yes.
I mean, that's part of the problem. I mean, it's interesting that if you tell them about black people, they would listen and say, "Oh yeah, I want to try to understand soul as black people relate to it." But you tell them that about Hindus, and for some reason, it's like Jews. I mean, for some reason, we're honorary whites. If people think there's something wrong with white people, then we're white people. Now, back when I was growing up, we weren't viewed as white, so you know, they're we were viewed as Jews, not white people. But it's a real problem because Hindus have been given this status that says, well, they're a majority in India, so therefore we can be for the underdogs who are Muslims. But the Muslims are actually, there are twice as many Muslims in the world as there are Hindus, and Hindus have all these countries, but they still treat the Hindus that they're sort of honorary. It's like people will say, oh, Modi's like Trump. And what they do is they actually treat Hindus who are proud of Hinduism in India as if they're like white nationalists. And they've got it all down. They talk to each other. And when you've got a situation like that, it's almost like a mob. They get together and they talk to each other, and anybody who doesn't share their ideas is dismissed as not being very smart. So, I mean, in high school, if you didn't share the reigning New York Times view of things, you were viewed as less smart than the people who did.
Absolutely. No, we'll save this thought for our next discussion. Today we already covered a lot of topics, and thank you, David, for coming and sharing your thoughts. And this. I'm sure this video will touch many hearts and many people. So we'll continue that. Thank you all for joining, and namaste, and thank you, David.
Namaste.